Thank you very much. So now we're going to talk about a very British stereotype, Mary Quant. So as a brand known for bringing designer fashion to the high street and democratising style, borrowing from menswear for women, Mary Quant makes a very obvious case study for this discussion. So as she said herself in 1966, once only the rich and the establishment set the fashion. Now it is the inexpensive little dress seen on the girl on the high street. These girls don't worry about accent or class, they are the mods. And starting in 1955 as a small London boutique called Bazaar on the King's Road in Chelsea, she initially sold a mix of knitwear, hats and accessories. I'm sure you know all this, but anyway, sourced from London wholesalers together with jewellery made from school, old art school friends that she had known. I love this image. It's actually Mary Quant in the centre of her coterie of models in Manchester rather than London, which seems important to say as well. So soon, in the 1950s, customers demanded to buy copies of Mary's own very distinctive clothes, like sailor dresses or schoolgirl pinafores, which she wore while working in the shop. And very soon, she made some of these clothes at home, and her cottage industry eventually built into this huge licensing business over the next decade. She designed Mary Quant branded raincoats, shoes, fur coats, underwear, makeup, even dolls, and later duvet covers, carpets and kitchen equipment, all made in factories around the whole of the UK, branded with her simple but effective Daisy logo. And I think clearly this relates back to Dior's licensing model as well, which Mary Quant obviously also kept very tight control of too, but she was obsessed with factories and obviously a very different idea to couture. So her style was also, right from the start, quintessentially British, catering for the bohemian social mix attracted to Chelsea, and also deliberately satirising and riffing on British tweeds and other fabrics, and also historical stereotypes such as the city businessman or the Norfolk jacket and breeches, sort of referring back to the past and these kind of British colonial stereotypes. And by 1966, the date of this photograph and this dress, the Chelsea look had come to symbolise the ideas and the youthful attitudes of swinging London. The dress shown here is called Rocket Romper, and that for me epitomises Quant's radical approach, literally taking a child's outfit, sizing it up for a grown-up, and selling it across the UK and beyond to over 50 countries, including North America, of course, and Australia and Europe. It would have sold for about 7 guineas, which is actually still quite expensive. It would have been about twice the price of a Marks & Spencer's dress of a similar type. So Quant's success was rooted in the existing infrastructure of the British ready-to-wear industry. And British fashion exports already marketed very much using the widely understood icons of British culture, such as Big Ben or policemen or Chelsea pensioners or telephone boxes. And these images I'm showing here suggest this idea of marketing Quant clothes by hamming up these ideas of Britishness and being sometimes deliberately provocative to appeal to those who wanted to reject everything old and traditional. And a strong theme that you see when you look into Quant's clothes is this idea of subverting menswear. She called things like Bank of England or Eton College these very quirky, fun and cool clothes, which kind of later epitomised what was called the youth quake. But this idea of subverting menswear kind of parallels the way in the 1950s and the 1960s, increasing access for women to education and some kinds of work was happening. And Quant's clothes both express and promote the struggle for equal opportunities. Quant herself talked about fashion, how it was important, it wasn't frivolous, and how it was empowering for women who were increasingly working in professional circles. And by appropriating traditional Savile Row tailoring with trousers, collars and ties, and she kind of camped up these traditional gender roles and also the class system. And she used humour to create new kinds of femininity in the early 60s, leading to the miniskirt, of course, and later more unisex fashion in the 1970s. She also played upon the idea of English eccentricity. She talked about this a lot. And alongside the very practical and masculine or minimal styles she promoted, she also reinvented Victorian dresses and traditional children's clothes, designing pretty styles sometimes, often using classic Liberty prints or the traditional wool flannels that Britain was famous for, but often she would persuade manufacturers to dye them in really bright colours like bright yellow or this bright orange. And it's actually this red dress I love because it's almost taking a Victorian red flannel petticoat and making it into this really fun kind of maxi dress of 1964. And it's interesting to think about how the French perceived Mary Quant. And so I looked very hard for magazines which wrote about Mary Quant. And in 1963, she had this very important event, a fashion show in the Hôtel Crillon in Paris. So London was already showing its ready-to-wear industry in Paris, and at this time, in April 1963, Mary Quant was invited to show her own designs. And she wrote about it, how crazy this fashion show was. Her style was very different to the kind of static, grown-up way that Paris fashion was marketed, always very energetic and fun with music and jazz for Mary Quant. And so the way she went down was obviously quite shocking in traditional couture circles. And the programme for her fashion show talks about how audacious it was to be showing British fashions in this way in France. And I think the article from the French Elle magazine is interesting too. And it very definitively positions Mary Quant as a media stereotype for the kind of, as a beatnik for the bohemian and arty student look. We can't avoid talking about the miniskirt, of course. And so increasingly, Mary Quant became known as a media star and a kind of influencer of her day. And she became literally the face of the miniskirt, which evolved actually from the late 1950s. But at the same time, Paris couturier André Courrèges was promoting trousers and short skirts for his often very wealthy clients. And in the past, Courrèges has often been credited with inventing the miniskirt. But in reality, I don't think anyone did invent the miniskirt. I think it was schoolgirls and young women, people dancing in clubs who improvised the style first. But according to newspaper coverage, I think we can really say that Mary Quant was very much responsible for popularizing the miniskirt. And perhaps the ultimate opportunity for photographs came when she collected her OBE medal for her contribution to British fashion exports. She was conspicuously dressed head to toe in all of her own products, in a wool jersey mini dress, complete with white lipstick. And the Daily Mail and other newspapers commented on her unconventional clothes at Buckingham Palace and how she stood out. They also talked about things like she didn't have a handbag, but it was very clever of her actually because she kept to the rules. She wore a hat, she wore gloves, but she kind of subverted them in a really clever way. And of course, images like these were syndicated to newspapers around the world. So a strong theme in the exhibition as well, of course, is this idea of liberated fashion. And looking back from 50 years later, in 2012, Mary Quant felt that the miniskirt was an entirely positive development, saying it was the most optimistic, look at me, isn't life wonderful fashion that had ever been devised. And of course, she didn't actually claim that she'd invented it either. She felt it was almost like a child that she had been given charge of and been made responsible for, but it was actually much bigger than anything she could have created. And certainly from our perspective, and at the time, it was pushing at the boundaries of taste. It gave some women the ability to retain the precious freedom of childhood and a confidence and a freedom of expression. And this reflected the slowly relaxing attitudes to sexuality of that period. Of course, the pill had come in 1963, but it wasn't widely available, so it actually took a much longer time for those kind of effects to really make an impact. But perhaps from now, in 2019, some of these fashion images that we're looking at here don't really give the impression of freedom of expression. It could certainly be argued that they create another oppressive stereotype, the impossibly skinny or infantilized and available dolly bird. So while preparing the exhibition, we've been talking to many women who wore Quant's designs to see what they meant to them at the time. And the focus of the finale of the exhibition is an immersive projection featuring over 50 photographs and personal quotes from our recent call out to the public for garments, memories, and family photographs. We show a whole sea of self-defined Quant women from all backgrounds and ages. And many of these told us how they saw Quant as a powerful role model who gave them an individual style of their own, kicking against the constraints of middle-class respectability. So some examples perhaps would be a lady called Susan White, who wore her quant mini dress riding her moped through the mill towns of Lancashire, much to the dismay apparently of the local community. And also Sue Nicholson, who this is a quote, horrified her conventional domestic science teachers by using her Mary Quant dress pattern for her O-level exam. So to conclude, the We Want Quant campaign, a social media campaign we did, this helped to underline the power of Mary Quant's brand and her deep connection to the consumers who identified with her attitude, even by buying just a lipstick or a pack of tights. The authenticity of her brand is something that fashion labels aspire to today, but it's hard to think of a current designer who embodies a similar mass appeal. And to return to the original perhaps provocative question of is fashion French, I think perhaps Mary Quant helps to pin down the point when fashion really, obviously, it's always been transitional, but I think we can really see how fashion was transcending these traditional boundaries on a very global scale at this point in the 60s. Of course, this revolution would have eventually happened anyway, without Mary Quant. She was lucky to have the backup of her husband's talent for marketing and their business partner's skills for finance. And also, of course, she was lucky to find herself at the heart of London's thriving post-war creative scene. But Mary Quant's unique personal qualities, her striking classless name, her distinctive looks, which were, of course, perfect for demonstrating the miniskirt, together with her intelligence, her humour and drive, I think this ensured that she alone became the figurehead of the future of fashion. And that's where I'm finishing.
Thank you.